How do we not talk about this story all the time? Honestly, this is one of the craziest things that happens before Revelation, at least in the New Testament. I mean, you have Jesus himself, God himself, essentially, in a one-on-one showdown being tested in the wilderness or tempted by who? By the devil himself. And never mind how we know about this when supposedly the Gospels are just written by eyewitness testimony and no one was there. That leaves two options for the recording of this story. One, what some more fundamentalist believers think, which is that God divinely tells these authors what to write, but that becomes incredibly problematic when you look at all the contradictions in the Gospels, which leaves us with only one other option. Jesus bragging about this when he gets back. Imagine that scene. He's hanging out with the 12. Guys, you'll never believe what happened. There I was. It was 40 days. I was starving. And guess who shows up? Like, it's so bewildering that people take this story literally. And the thing is that they do. Protestants, Catholics, whatever you want. Yes, sometimes people add in some symbolism. Oh, it was 3 temptations for a reason. Or, oh, it was representing larger temptations. But they really believe, I would be surprised to find any major Christian sect that doesn't say Jesus in his human form literally went into the wilderness after his baptism and was met by the devil who tempted him. That's a crazy thing to think about. And so I want to get into the story today, and I want to talk about just how much it does not make sense. Let's set the stage. This happens immediately following Jesus' baptism, but the story is only found in 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The earliest Gospel is Mark, and it leaves out most of the details, which makes what we see in Matthew and Luke look pretty suspicious when we're just adding these things in. I'm going to read to you the entire event in Mark. It takes just 1 second. At once the Spirit sent him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended him. That's it. And one of the biggest differences here that's interesting, and this is inconsistent based off which translation you're always using, but right now I'm using NIV as we look at Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And the NIV in Mark says Satan, which is a title, the accuser, like what we see in the Old Testament. But by the time we get to Matthew and Luke's account, it is now the devil, and we now have all of these specifics, 3 temptations, some symbolism going on here, and also a good amount of Bible quoting. There's a lot of work being done in Matthew and Luke to make Jesus who he is, what they need him to be for their accounts, upping the status of even his enemy, not some random accuser. This is the devil himself. And yes, there's contradictions even between Matthew and Luke, the main one being the order of the temptation, which you could say doesn't really matter. But again, if divinely inspired, should be consistent. And if it's just Jesus telling everyone so that we have eyewitness accounts, can you imagine Mark leaving out the details of the specific 3 temptations? Like I said, there's problems all over the place here. But let's dive into at least what the authors agree is the first temptation. And I'll just read from Matthew for this one. So it starts, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. I love that. It's like the most understated statement in the Bible. The tempter came out to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Now it's interesting because that sentence starts with after 40 days, and then we see this happening, which would make this a really stupid temptation. Jesus is about to walk down and go eat if it's truly after the 40 days. Kind of loses its punch. But Luke fixes that for us because Luke's account says, led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. So we can imagine that this happened sometime during those 40 days. Might be pedantic to call out how specific it's worded in Matthew and what that would lead to, but again, I mean, language matters here. But going back to Matthew, he says, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answers him, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Now, one thing I want to talk about here are the verses that Jesus chooses to use. This one is from Deuteronomy 8:3. And what's funny, and go and read it for yourself, is Jesus and the devil both essentially use verses out of context. It's like the first example here of Christians and even their adversaries picking something out of the Bible to say, but it says this. And then they pick something else random out of the Bible to combat and say, but this one says this. Like, we get it. You can make a claim for pretty much anything in the Bible and a claim against anything, even if that thing is in the Bible, from still the Bible itself. But what do we want to say about temptation number 1 here? I think the first thing, and this is probably true for all 3, is we need to come to terms with, is Jesus human or not, right? The Christian idea is that he is 100% God and 100% human. And it's hard as a non-believer, like especially someone who wasn't raised in it, to make any sense of that, just as hard as it is to make of the Trinity. But it's kind of just a given within Christianity that during this time, for the 33 years, Jesus, the Son of God, is God himself coming down in human form. And at times he seems to be limited by his humanity, and other times he's not. Sometimes he doesn't know what's going on, and sometimes he can read the hearts and minds of the people around him. Sometimes he can perform miracles if there's enough faith or belief, but sometimes he can't. Sometimes he seems to be aware of his future fate, and other times he doesn't. I mean, even the scene of him asking God the Father if there's another way, if this can be removed from him, what he is about to go through, the crucifixion, it just makes no sense. You're bargaining with yourself about if you're going to let yourself out of the own deal that you sent yourself to do to fix the thing for the thing that you caused in the first place. Like, again, trying to make sense out of the story at all is futile. But insofar as these specific temptations are brought up, I think we really need to wrestle with, okay, where is Jesus in his head now? From which denomination point of view are you ascribing power to Jesus or not? Can we admit that Jesus was hungry in his human form? Sure. And so was he tempted by warm bread? Probably. Anecdotally, I have done a pretty long water fast where I had literally nothing but water. I didn't even have supplements. I didn't even do salt. I did this when I was still a believer. I did 200 hours. It's a bit over 7 days, and it's grueling. And I can only imagine 40, although it actually gets pretty easy towards the end. And there's been tons of people that have done 40-day water fast, and tons of people that have gone further than Jesus. Oftentimes I would hear this touted in church as like this impossible thing, similar to how Jesus was the only one who never sinned. And it's like, okay, fasting for 40 days, very hard. Yes, very few people in history have done it, but people have done it. Also, we have no evidence that Jesus really did this, where we actually have evidence of real human beings without divine assistance doing it. And B, tying this into Jesus being able to remain sinless. Like, this is, I think, one of the things that we're supposed to glean from this story. And I've said this before, if the only person in human history that never sinned just so happened to also be God himself in human form, what are we supposed to take away from that? We're supposed to believe that he was just another human at random and happened to be the only one that never sinned? No, of course he only didn't sin because of his divinity. God was going to send himself down to what? Fail? It's just such an empty claim. And so bringing it back into this first temptation, would we expect God himself in human form during or after, depending on which version you read, to take the deal from his mortal or immortal enemy? No, we wouldn't. So what does Jesus want here? A pat on the back? You know what was hard when I was fasting for 7 days? Watching TV and seeing ads come up. And it looks like the best food you've ever had. Still going out to dinner with friends and sitting there. In fact, I had this work party thing I had to go to at this pizza shop that I loved downtown. And I sat there like this with my water while everyone is drinking pop and beer and garlic breadsticks and pepperoni pizza. That's torture. And I did it. So again, with everything on the line, the fate of the world, if you believe that Jesus had to be sinless and perfect, which would mean not yielding to temptation in order for the atonement to work. Good job not turning those stones to bread. Again, the way Christians talk about the story and preach about the story, you would think like it's the most impossible thing no one can imagine doing. It's been done, probably more difficult. But let's move on to the second one. The devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. You can't do that, by the way, unless you think the earth is flat, but let's move past that. All this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. Again, setting the stage for Christians to resist power, to never, no matter what, denounce God, never bow down and worship the devil, since that seems to be on offer for all of these Christians. We could talk about all the people that believe you can sell your soul and become a pop star, all of the things that have been strewn out from this. I think the first thing that most people, upon first reading, even as a Christian, they say, wait, why is this the devil's to give? And that's an interesting question. And we get further detail on this if we read the Luke account, because it expands on this. The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. This makes it seem much more miraculous. Like I'm just letting you see this, as opposed to physically being on a top of a mountain and looking out over the kingdoms. I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. If you worship me, it will all be yours. So Matthew and Luke are the first time where we see that the devil has this power, at least in the Protestant canon, and to this degree. You know, some of the ideas that Christians will use to excuse this power is looking back at the story of Job, where we see who is directly linked, even though that's not clear, the devil in this story to Satan in the story of Job as the accuser who goes before God and gets permission to do this thing. And so we just assume God has, for whatever reason, given the ownership of these things, given permission to the devil to tempt Jesus in this way. Seems really weird, strange, and backwards, but where else can you draw it from? I mean, we do hear the devil called the prince of this world, but that's in John, and that comes after these stories. But you know where the stories come before that would give us this idea? The apocryphal stories, especially that of the book of Enoch. In those accounts, we have stories of a fallen angel hierarchy that rules over the physical world. And of course, the anonymous gospel authors who wrote Matthew, Mark, and Luke were very familiar with these stories. And you can see that that theology influenced what they believed about their enemy and the powers that he had. But again, can we just agree that this is a monumental issue that Satan would ever have the dominion over earth? It's completely unnecessary. You can see my video here on why spare Satan, where I go into the details a bit more on that. Still in Luke, Jesus answers, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Again, Jesus is quoting from Dute here. This is 6:13. Now, just for fun, let's actually read the Matthew account because it's a bit different. Here, Jesus replies, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him and the angels came and attended him, because in Matthew, this is the third thing that happens, where in Luke, it is the second. But we'll talk more about the order in just a second. I want to finish speaking about the second temptation. We need to try to understand, what did Jesus believe about himself at this time? Like, what do the Christians believe? Imagine if you know that you are the Son of God, that you are God, that when you die, which you've been around literally forever, you didn't have a beginning. Eons and eons and eons and eons have passed, if there even is literal time, but at least since you created the world, at this juncture, you've been hanging out for thousands of years in literal time. So 33 years, less than 0.00001%, right? Just doesn't even factor in. He knows this moment will pass. He's at least 30 here. All you got to do is hold out for 3 years, you will return to being fully God, truly sovereign and owner of everything, the entire cosmos. Who cares about this little earth? You're going to remake it anyways. What kind of a temptation would this be, unless Jesus is just a man? But remember, the claim is that Jesus was fully man and fully God. If there's even an ounce of divinity in Jesus right now, this claim would sound ridiculous, truly absurd. But again, we're supposed to read it and be amazed. Wow, look, he turned down all that power? Even if Jesus was just a man who believed himself to be just a Messiah, because again, the Jewish idea of the Messiah wasn't always some son of God, eventual God himself kind of a thing. It was someone that was going to come and unify the territory and create peace. So again, if he really believed himself to be this Messiah figure, even if not as divinely so, all he's got to do here is stick to his plan, stick to his guns, believe in what God's purpose for him is. Like, this is the problem, actually. Tempting Jesus just doesn't make sense, no matter where you place him on the divinity scale or the knowledge scale of the divinity at that time. But again, we'll talk about that more. Let's get through the last one. So in Luke, where this actually shows up last, the devil led him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." So now it's the devil quoting the Bible out of context against his adversary, and that comes from Psalm 91. And did you see what happened here? Again, this is where you can see that the anonymous gospel writers are trying to create something, because here, using the devil to utter the words, "If you are the Son of God." We're making a divinity claim right here. This is apologetics happening right in the middle of the Gospels. So how does Jesus answer? He just moves forward 3 verses from last time. So Dude 6:16. It is also written, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." And going back to Luke, where it's the third and final one, it says, "When the devil had finished all this tempting, he left him until an opportune time." Cliffhanger. That's not how it ends in Matthew. After the third temptation, it says, "Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him." What does the Son of God need to prove to a lesser created being, angel, that he himself created? Like, imagine what both of these entities would actually believe or think they know if the stories were true. This devil, if he really was Lucifer in the beginning, becomes prideful and thinks he can do better than God, and thus his pride causes him to fall, and then he is somehow allowed in, gets control of the earth, as we see here. He knew who this God was. He knew he was a created being by this God. So that's the devil's state of mind. Again, if all this were true in Jesus, even if he only believes himself to be the Son of God, he believes, my dad made you. Or more likely, if the Trinitarian concepts are correct, he believes, I made you. In what world would Jesus, the Son of God / God himself, feel the need to prove himself to an entity that he created, knowing that that entity knows that? Like, do you guys understand what I'm saying? Do you understand how ridiculous this concept is? But again, we're supposed to be in awe and fascinated at Jesus resisting the devil. And how did he do it? He did it by quoting from the Bible. And I want to talk about that as a quick side tangent. Don't you think if what we're supposed to be learning from Jesus here is the power to resist temptation, to be Christ-like, to not give in to the schemes of the devil, and to do so how, in what way? By using the word of God. Don't you think that what Jesus quotes from gets like some extra significance? Like, here we have it. We have the Son of God at his most trying time, other than maybe the crucifixion itself, falling back on strength from the power of the word of God, and exclusively 3 times for his 3 temptations uses the 5th book of the Bible. Would you guys do me a favor after this? Would you go watch this video? And if all you want to do is skip forward to point 7, the problematic passages, go and see all of the horrific things from this same book of the Bible that Jesus is quoting his strength from. See if you see any issues there in giving so much credit and credence to this book. Look how useful it is to Jesus himself. Surely it's filled with good things. Surely it tells us about this God. This would have worked so much better if our protagonist, our hero here, was human. We need a level of uncertainty. We need the absence of divinity. We need a flaw. We need the ability for this not to work out. And we just don't have it. And that's why this whole thing feels so empty, so useless, so absurd. It's the issue for a lot of things in the Bible. We have overpowered this particular God. You need a pantheon to create tension. You need a God that's not all-knowing, all-powerful, and claim to be all-benevolent. That's why it's so hard to pull moral stories from the Bible in the same way that we get them elsewhere. You know, look at the story of the Odyssey. Look at Odysseus resisting the siren's call. That's a good moral story about resisting temptation. Look at Hercules and the myth of having to be wooed by either pleasure or virtue, and him choosing virtue. In Hindu mythology, you have Hanuman, who is constantly searching for Sita on this epic journey. He's tempted many times to just forgo the journey or stay a while longer for these luxuries, these pleasures along the way. If you want a really good comparison, look at the temptation of Zoroaster. He was tempted by a spirit, Ahriman, many times, pretty similar, being lured with power and wealth. It's not an original story. You know, having your hero have to go through the trial, maybe abandoning the mission for the life of ease, comfort, power, glory, whatever. It's a tale as old as time. So the Bible's telling it poorly, by the way, comparatively, and ineffectively because of the Superman complex they gave their God. There's no consistent moral message to be gleaned here. The Gospels themselves can't even get the story to agree. It's theologically inconsistent with other things, whether it's who Satan is or the devil, if they're the same thing or not, what power he has or doesn't have, who gave him that power or not, what Jesus believed about himself at this time, if he's 100% human and 100% God at the same time, or if he's actually fallible in his human state. Was God only letting him know certain things at certain times? So right now he doesn't doesn't actually know if he's going to inherit the kingdoms. He doesn't know if he's going to make it down off this mountain to eat bread again. He doesn't know that the angels will catch him, so he doesn't want to do the test. Why didn't Jesus quote about all the times that God did like to be tested? You have so many contradictions in the Bible itself that even the verses Jesus is using to quote against, I can pull out verses saying the opposite. It's so stupid. So that's it. I just wanted to highlight the insanity of this particular text that gets glossed over. Let me know your thoughts on it. I'm really curious. I'll see you Tuesday with another takedown, and until then, keep thinking. I'd like to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast and Boris GVI, Jason, Joe, Kitboga, Perry, Rokkit, Shawn, and StrongRex; my Humanist heroes: Imposter, James, Jarrod, Kristi, and Thronus; my Atheist advocates: Caleb, David, Jeff, Jeffrey, Mrs. Webb, Paul, Sparky, and Todd; as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people.